We pick up ace-queen offsuit early on. A few more players have showed up, so it's five-handed now. Onto the gun, raises to 30. The opponent is Boston Jimmy, who I've known for a long time and I've played quite a bit with. I make the call in position. We're heads up. The flop comes ace-8 deuce. We've got top pair and a kicker that's sneakily good since we elected not to 3-bet pre-flop. Onto the gun knows ace-high flop should be better for his range. He bets 40. In this instance, we're not too upset to see the ace out there at all. I call with what's likely the best hand. The turn is the jack of clubs, putting a flush draw on the board, but a lot of the highest clubs are accounted for, so there's not too much to be worried about. What concerns me at least a little is that the opponent bets 130. It's nearly a pot-sized bet. He could be doing this with a variety of bluffs, including Broadway draws, or he could have a real hand like a set or two pair. Our hand still feels under-repped. I call to see a river. The dealer puts out the ace of spades. We improve to trips. We've got a monster. The opponent slows down and checks. I'm not entirely sure what to make of this. If he flopped or turned a set, it'd be a good card for him to check because fairly often I'll have trips. He can put in a check raise. But not going for value is absurd. I bet 300, thinking that I can get called by worse aces. There's no call this time. The opponent follows through with the check raise at 1200. It's time to abort. We could be up against ace-jack or pocket eights, or even ace-king. We're not really beating any of the hands that under the gun would play this way for value. You'd probably just call with ace-10 or worse. I'm annoyed that I went with somewhat of a large river sizing, and I need to properly punish myself. The best way to do that is to make sure I lose even more money.
Hello? Yeah.
Nice heavy. It's a frustrating run out, but I probably should have bet smaller on the river or not called the raise. I told myself I wasn't going to call a raise before it happened, then leveled myself after thinking the opponent might think a board with two aces and a jack would be better for him. Trips versus a full house is a cooler no matter what. Still, I know if I'm playing my best, I can get away from it. Instead, I'm stuck 1400 immediately and add on. I get switched to the must move where we've got pocket sixes in the big blind. The middle position player raises to 30. The button calls. It's only 20 more for us. I call as well. Three of us are seeing the flop. It comes ace-6-5 with two clubs. We've got middle set and multiple opponents. I check. The initial pre-flop raiser is very generous. He donates $30 to our live GoFundMe. Not to be outdone, the button matches the donation. While I appreciate their contributions, we're a destitute case and need more to get unstuck. I raise to 130. The middle position player doesn't like the spot that he's found himself in. He folds. The button may have an ace or a strong draw. He makes the call for 100 more. It's down to heads up. The turn is the deuce of hearts, putting a second flush draw on the board. Otherwise, it's mostly a blank, since it's unlikely our opponent has 4-3 for a straight. There are a lot of draws out there. We need to get as much money in now while we probably have the lead, or before a scare card comes out, killing the action. I bet 400. It's a slight overbet. The opponent has a massive stack of over 8,000. He's the Warren Buffett of this 5-10 table. He can afford to get some money in bad. He calls once again, making this a substantial pot. The river is the 5 of clubs, pairing the board to give us a full house while completing the front door flush draw. It's the perfect card to win the max from an opponent who very easily could have improved to a hand that'll decimate his stack. If the opponent only has an ace, he probably won't want to call a river bet of any sizing, since he no longer even beats most hands that I might have check raised with as a semi-bluff on the flop. I bet 1300 to target ace-5, 6-5, and clubs. The opponent called an overbet on the turn. I don't see why he wouldn't here. I can see it in his eyes as he ponders his decision that he doesn't want to let go of what he's got. 1300 ends up being just slightly too much. He folds. It's too bad we aren't able to get out of the hole all in one hand. We at least get a nice chunk back though. The opponent tells me that he had ace-deuce. He turned two pair and got counterfeited on the river. It's tough to make much additional money when he essentially has top pair and no kicker. About 10 minutes later, we've got ace-queen of hearts in the cutoff. The straddle's on again. I raised to 50. There's an older viewer in the big blind who plays recreationally. He puts in a small 3-bet to 150. It's not that much more for us. I call to play in position. The flop comes ace-3-3 with two spades. We've got top pair and a strong kicker. The big blind checks, indicating that he doesn't like the flop much. Sometimes opponents will do this if they have a monster like pocket aces, but two aces are accounted for, so there's only one possible combination of that hand. The opponent could still have ace-king, kings or queens. We don't want to build the pot in case we're losing to ace-king, and kings and queens will hate seeing the ace out there, so I check back to keep the pot small in case we're losing, while feigning weakness in order to potentially get more money down the line from combinations that are drawing nearly dead. The turn is the queen of spades, improving us the top two pair. The big blind puts out a tiny bet of 70. We can't allow the opponent to see a river card for that price with 3 spades on the board. He could have pocket kings or ace king with the king of spades. I raised to 220 to make it a real amount. The big blind is down to get really real. He re-raises to 620. I mentioned earlier, he's an older rec player. He doesn't strike me as the type to get out of line 3-betting me with medium suited connectors or anything like that. And the ace and queen of spades are accounted for, so I don't put him on a flush. We've got removal of pocket aces and pocket queens, making it incredibly unlikely that we'd be up against those two hands. The opponent only has 1270 remaining in the stack, so I contemplate jamming because the most likely hand that we'll be up against is ace king with the king of spades. The line he's taking is very indicative of a flopped or turned full house, so even though the chance of us being beat right now is minimal, I call for 400 more to keep the pot smaller just in case, and to potentially allow the opponent to keep bluffing with kings in the rare instances he's being overly aggressive with that hand. The river is the deuce of hearts. It's blanker than Garrett's face when he sees Jack 4 offsuit get tabled to win a 6-figure pot. I'll happily call off a jam from the opponent for 1270. Instead, the big blind down bets to 600. He may have bitten off more than he could chew with that re-raise on the turn, and the fact that I called him set off some alarm bells that his ace king is no good. Now he wants to get to showdown for a discount. As confident as I am that we've got the best hand and should rip it for value, there's still some possibility that we could be losing. I wimp out and just call. I'm glad we didn't rip it because the opponent shows pocket aces, drilling the last ace in the deck, and getting almost the best turn card possible for him to win the maximum, but he somehow manages not to get the full double up. It's one more brutal run out that causes us to lose almost 1400 more. The deck isn't our friend at all this session. I'm stuck about 2000 and we're down ace king offsuit on the button. A player who just came over from the must move raises to 30 from under the gun. Under the gun +1 calls. Ace king isn't the type of hand that we want to go multiple ways to a flop with. I 3-bet to 160 in order to win it without seeing a flop or to narrow it down to heads up. Under the gun calls for 130 more. It's too much for under the gun +1. He folds. We get what we wanted. We're heads up in position. The flop comes ace 8-6 rainbow. We've got top in a situation where we should have the lead by a mile, except in the rare instances the opponent has a set of 8s or 6s. Under the gun checks. With a similar thought process to the last hand that we went over, I check back to keep the pot smaller when we're beat and allow the opponent an opportunity to bluff on future streets if he mistakenly assumes that we won't be strong after checking. The turn is the 7 of clubs. I don't have any strong feelings either way towards seeing that card. Pocket 7s improves to have us beat, and under the gun could have picked up a straight draw with a few other pocket pairs, but it shouldn't have changed much. The opponent bets 200. We checked back turns to induce bluffs. I call hoping that's what's going on right now, or maybe under the gun could even have an ace with a worse kicker. The river is the 4 of spades, putting 4 to the straight on board, but it's very unlikely that the opponent has a 5 in his hand. The 4 doesn't scare the opponent. He bets 500. There are a number of ways that we could be beat, but we can't underrep our hand on the flop, check back for pot control, and fold once we see 2 reasonably sized bets. The opponent might even be value betting ace queen here if he thinks that I have kings or queens. I call. The opponent says that he has 2 pair. He shows ace 8 of clubs. He has outflopped and wins a big pot. Maybe I could have folded to the river and saved 500, but it's hard to wrap my head around how often I'm running into monsters. I'm just continuously finding ways to get totally wrecked, but I'm only down about 1 buy-in. Things can change quickly. After adding on again, I pick up 8-7 suited in the hijack. I'm in for 5,900 total on the day. The player in middle position raises to 30. We're certainly not going to get unstuck by playing single raised pots. I 3-bet to 100, even though folding is really the best option. The big blind wants to get involved. He puts in the cold 4-bet to 360. I saw him 4-bet ace queen offsuit in a hand earlier in a spot that I thought was suspect, so he's not necessarily going to just have aces or kings. The initial pre-flop raiser folds. We're playing deep with a chance to see a flop in position with a hand that'll often connect well. I call for 260 more. Maybe it's our time to get lucky. The dealer puts out 6-5-3 rainbow. We've got a hidden open-ended straight draw. The big blind down bets at 300. Maybe he has an overpair, but he could just have ace high. If he has an overpair, he won't fold if I raise because I won't be able to rep anything credible since I wouldn't have 3-bet and called a 4-bet with a small pocket pair that improved the sets on this flop. If I raise, I could get some ace high hands to fold, but those hands will check on the turn anyway, and then I can bet at that point to represent pairs of queens, jacks, and 10s. 300 is a good cheap price for us to see a turn. I call with plans of making a move on the next street if we get a good opportunity. The turn is the jack of clubs. At some point in the session, maybe we'll get a card that will give us the nuts, but This one isn't it. We see an opening though. The opponent checks. He could have ace highs like we suspected after all. The jack falls firmly in our 4-bet calling range pre-flop. In fact, if you asked the opponent what he thought we had 30 seconds ago, he'd probably be like, that dude definitely has the 2-piece McJiggities. I bet 750 as a semi-bluff to get ace-king and ace-queen type of hands to fold. If the opponent has an overpair, he'll probably just call because this isn't a good turn for him. I have bad news. The opponent doesn't make the call. He rips it in my stupid face for 1,400 more. He has me covered. Even if he showed me ace-king of clubs right now, I'd still have to fold because I'm not getting the right price. I have no choice. I let it go and lose over 1,400 in a completely unnecessary way. I could have folded pre-flop and avoided all of that, but this is the first time in the session that I tried to force it with a speculative hand and it completely backfires. This is when our Spanish opponent, who wasn't in the hand, gets creative and tries to use the fact that I'm filming to gain information.
No bluff? You don't have to, it's up to you.
You brought on? No.
Nice hand. Thanks, man. Yeah.
The opponent showed pocket kings for the best hand. I find another interesting way to lose a lot of money. I can justify losing big amounts in those other situations, but this one is fully attributed to me playing worse because I'm losing. I should probably call it because it's not my day and I'm not playing that well, but I know the card distribution has to turn around eventually. There are a few people who said hi to me earlier that are at the must move just to hopefully make it to the main game in order to get a chance at my money, and I'm giving it away just like the Red Hot Chili Peppers told me to, so there's a high likelihood that they'll walk away with some of it if I wait for them to get over. But above all, there's nothing I like less than walking out of the casino with less money than I walked in with, so for that reason, I'm staying.